Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting, the I'm Crying and Impressed edition. Today is episode 201. African elephants have individual name-like calls for each other, and this half-inch fish sounds like a jet engine. Oh, my friends. I'm going to need you to have some Kleenex on hand for the first half of the show because it focuses on an animal we've featured at least a half dozen other times. Thanks to incredible leaps in technology, researchers can now non-invasively peer into nearly every square inch of our pachyderm friends. And what's been found has left us speechless. For example, way the fuck back in episode 171, Elephants Can Hear With Their Feet, and Woolly Rhino Genome, reconstructed from poop, we learned, well, lots of things, but specifically that elephants, African elephants, can hear with their feet. Yes, each foot, which is 20 inches in diameter, by the way, is covered in nerve receptors called Pacinian corpuscles, or PCs, and we have them too. PCs are hardwired to the somatosensory cortex, or a part of the brain where touch signals are processed. And yes, while their adorably large ears can pick up sound from 2.5 miles away, evidence suggests that vibrations can be picked up in their foot pads and transmitted to their brain via bone conduction. Essentially, those vibrations travel through the elephant's skeleton directly to its inner ear bones. That's fucking nifty. And you want to know what else is nifty? African elephants can easily pick up infrasound, which is sound below 20 hertz, a level our human ears cannot hear. But they're able to detect this infrasound from up to 6 miles away. And this leads us back to the first half of the show. My friends, a new study on the low-frequency rumbles of African savanna elephants has revealed they may have individual names. Yes, their own names. And they use those names to call each other. You are gonna fucking cry when you hear how the study was conducted, who the researchers recorded to make this discovery, and a theory as to how an elephant even gets their name to begin with. You will be in joyous tears, and you can thank a member of the flock for that. Lauren, once again, Lauren, goddammit. Thank you. Thank you for reaching out over the social media stuffs and sending an article about this. You are a hero and a champion and a phenomenon. And if any other member of the flock craves to be a hero and a champion and a phenomenon, well, please know that deep down you are too. And that you can send anything you think is interesting via email at wellthatsinterestingpod@gmail.com, or DM me over Instagram or Twitter, or tag me in the comments to something. I will see it. And remember, we are all amazing, but not as amazing as elephants. After the break, a tiny fish. It's so tiny, but not only is it so tiny, but it's basically translucent. It barely exists, y'all, but it just so happens to be one of the loudest creatures on Earth. Among those is the snapping shrimp, which also goes by the appropriate name of pistol shrimp. With one powerful snap of its claw, it shoots out a prey-stunning air bubble. When it pops, the result is a shockwave, a flash of light, and a noise that could reach up to 250 decibels. Too much. Speaking of which, the mating calls of the flightless kakapo, which also goes by the appropriate names of owl parrot and moss chicken. And please Google moss chicken. I don't know how, but this bird looks like a moss chicken. Anyway, its calls can reach 130 decibels. It is horny and loud. And elephants, because of course I had to. Elephants can produce noises at up to 125 decibels with their trunks. But, my friends, it's going to be an honor to introduce you to a half-inch fish that can go toe-to-toe with these contenders. I'll show you how they do it and why. The how part is unlike anything we've seen in nature, so you gotta stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my rambunctious business goose. To begin, I'd like you to take a moment and think about all the names you go by and all the names you answer to. If you stop and think about it, the list is probably a long one. You have your legal name, a nickname used by friends, and that name may actually be different depending on the friend. There's the name your cutie pie calls you, the name you put up with at work, and the several thousand names you use for social media accounts. It's complicated, isn't it? Your name all depends on context and relationships. And guess what? Thanks to recent groundbreaking studies, we now know we humans aren't alone with this. We are just beginning to understand that some animals have their own system when it comes to names. Specifically, long-lived social animals that reside in groups, just like bottlenose dolphins, for example. Now, if you're a longtime member of the flock, then you know these fuckers are smarty pants, and their ability to communicate can even traverse their own species. Way the fuck back in episode 093, let's talk about these dolphins for a minute, we learned that this intelligence can be used, you guessed it, to defend the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Yes, indeed, if something is array regarding the 4,000 to 6,000 nuclear warheads assigned to Bangor Submarine Base, just off Seattle, Washington, there are military-grade dolphins out there to tell us. If you haven't had a listen to episode 093, you should. Something a little less disturbing. Within the first few months of life, every bottlenose dolphin creates its own unique whistle. That's right. They craft a tune of sorts, and they use this as a way to identify themselves. Let's get into it for a bit. Quote, in the underwater environment, animals use their own signature whistles to broadcast their identity and say, I'm here, said Stephanie King, a marine biologist at the University of St. Andrews, to Nell Greenfield-Boyce of NPR News. Now, back in 2013, Stephanie and her colleagues dropped a banger of their own. A study that showed when bottlenose dolphins in captivity get separated from each other, they call out to their loved ones by imitating their whistles. Yeah. In the second half of that study, they played the recorded whistles of 12 dolphins living off the east coast of Scotland. What happened next was astonishing. Quote, it was very exciting to see that every time a dolphin heard its signature whistle, it called back, sometimes multiple times, Stephanie told NPR. Not only did the dolphins call back, but they even swam towards the speakers that were playing the sound. It was a behavior you might expect if two friends were trying to find each other in a crowd. End quote. So, my delectable business goose, dolphins mimic each other's signature's whistle to get their attention, to call them. And hold on to your rhythmic cheeks, because we recently found out that wild parrots do the same damn thing, wild parrots. But they create their unique whistle, aka name, by slightly modifying the signature call of their caregivers. I know, it's painfully cute. Gotta think of it as a form of Bird Jr. of so-and-so. That's their whistle. Are you crying already? Well, prepare yourself, because it's going to get a lot more adorable and weepy from here on out. My friends, I'd like to introduce you to a fellow crier named Mickey Pardo, a biologist at Cornell University, and Mickey here is really into elephants. Creatures known for their cognitive skills and empathy. They've been documented grieving, for example. And after time apart, they also appear to celebrate when they reunite with those familiar to them. even those of a different species. So, with this, and inspired by the findings on dolphins and wild parrots, he set out on the not-so-little task of discovering if elephants, too, do something similar. He wanted to know if elephants have their own names. And I know what you may be thinking. Where do you even fucking begin? How do you do this? Great question. Well, if we follow in the footsteps of previous studies like Stephanie's, we have a pretty good starting point. We need to get our hands on some recordings. Luckily for Mikey, he's not the only elephant nerd in town. In fact, thanks to literally decades of well-organized work by biologists before him, this brand new study had a 38-year head start. Let's get into it. Mikey gathered a few fellow researchers from Colorado State University and the nonprofits Save the Elephants and Elephant Voices, who then were tasked with gathering audio recordings of wild adult female/calf groups in Kenya's Amboseli National Park from 1986 to 2006, and Kenya's Samburu Buffalo Springs National Reserves from 2019 to 2022. That was a lot, and if over 2 decades of recordings sounds like a lot of recordings, it fucking is. A total of 469 low-frequency rumbles were collected for this study. That is impressive. But this is only the beginning. Every single recording was meticulously organized. For each rumble, the researchers knew the identity of the speaker, the identity of the perceived receiver, and the behavioral context between the two. These low-frequency rumbles were made during the following interactions: contact calling, greeting, and caregiving. This is so precise and organized. I'm jealous. Now that we have all this data, the sounds, the context in which they're made, and the human-given names of the callers and receivers, what could we possibly do with it all? If you said, feed it into AI and use machine learning to see if the rumbles contain patterns or identifying information, i.e. a real name, that the computer model could learn to use to accurately predict the receiver of a call, you are right. As such was done. And after the speedy clickety-clack calculations were made, how did AI perform? Drumroll, please. Quote, what they found is that their model was able to identify the correct elephant recipient of the call 27.5% of the time, which is much better than how it performed during a control analysis that fed it random data. Mickey told Nell Greenfield Boyce of NPR News, this indicates that there must be something in the calls that's allowing the model to figure out at least some of the time who that call was addressed to. End quote. Well, there's something in the calls. And if that gave you chills, you are not alone. The gang's spidey senses were tingling, and this experiment needed a second act. Just with Stephanie's dolphin study, Mickey packed up the recordings, his colleagues, and hit the road. The task was now to head over to Kenya's Amboseli National Park and Samburu National Reserves to find some of the elephants to whom the low-frequency rumbles were directed towards, aka the receivers of these calls. Now, you may be thinking, okay, that seems like finding a needle in a haystack between a rock and a hard place. And some of these needles were alive in like 1986. Are you sure they're still around? Well, these are magnificent thoughts. And you're right. You're absolutely right to even ask if these beautiful animals are still with us. Now, in the best case scenario, African savanna elephants can live up to 70 years in the wild. But right now, the world isn't the best case scenario. The population of savanna elephants has declined by at least 60% in the last 50 years, and their listed as endangered. In an ironic twist, however, because of this dire situation, both populations for this study have been continuously monitored for decades. And 17 elephants, 15 adult females, 1 9-year-old female, and 1 9 to 10-year-old male in the Samburu study area were able to participate in the playback portion of this experiment. Yes, the researchers were able to track down some of the original receivers of the low-frequency calls. And then the plan then included getting these elephants in the right place at the right time. Quote, "We had to find a situation where a specific elephant was by herself, or at least not with the individual who made the recording," end quote, Mickey told NPR, explaining that the team would then play the recording through a loudspeaker, end quote. Yes, my popular business goose, the plan was, when the receiver was all alone, grazing or doing whatever that they do out there, that elephant would hear a recorded call that was originally addressed to her, and then hear a call made by the same elephant that was not intended for her. Essentially, researchers hypothesized that if there was a name somewhere within that rumble, the elephants would react preferentially to the recordings that contained those sounds. So, what the fuck happened? I'm glad you asked. My friends, I'm firing up the old tube of you, and I'm going to play a few seconds of 2 videos, each uploaded by NPG Press and provided by Mickey and the gang from this study, and I'm going to ask you to lean in and have a listen. It's going to go by quickly, okay? In the first video, we have gorgeous Margaret grazing in the savannah. She's chill, totally unassuming, and what we're going to hear is a playback recording of a call made by Margaret's daughter Marie that was originally addressed to Margaret. So yes, this is like a daughter calling her mom here. It's very sweet. So please lean in and have a listen, and do pay attention to what happens shortly after the playback. Here we go. Okay, that went by quick. But, hot damn, there was a reaction to that recorded call from Marie. It was essentially a prank call, yes, but Margaret did respond with her own low rumble. So, let's move on to the second video. We're back with Margaret, but this time, the prank call / sound played back is a recording of a call made by daughter Marie, but it was originally addressed to someone other than Margaret. So, let's have a listen and see what happens. Here we go. Okay. If you didn't hear anything, because I didn't hear anything, we are absolutely right. Margaret raised her head at the sound, but she didn't reply. She just went on back to grazing and maybe silently cursing her kid under her breath. My friends, these are just a few examples of what repeatedly happened during the playback sessions. Elephants, quote, approached more quickly, vocalized sooner, and produced more vocalizations in response to playbacks of calls addressed to them than to another receiver, which indicates that they can recognize and respond to their own name. End quote, from the study, simply titled, African Elephants Address One Another Individually with Specific Name-like Calls. The title says it all. And it's fucking wild. It's fucking wild. And it leaves us with a lot more questions. Like, do elephants use the same name when addressing the same recipient? Or do they have different names for each other? Which, this all sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Do elephants talk about someone else in the third person? Do they ever use somebody else's name when they're not there. And yeah, I'm talking about elephant tea. It will be truly revolutionary. Not if, but when we find out the answers to these questions. So please watch this space. The team is currently attempting to isolate the name segment somewhere embedded in these complex infrasound rumbles. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you with this absolute fucking tearjerker, okay? Remember the results of the wild parrot study? That they create their names or their signature calls by slightly modifying the signature call of their caregivers, essentially calling themselves Bird Jr. of so-and-so? Well, Carl Berg, a biologist of University of... Let me try that again. Carl Berg, a biologist at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Carl was behind that study. Carl read over Mickey and the gang's experiment and said this to Nell Greenfield Boyce of NPR. Quote, "The rumbles containing the identifying information often seem to be generated by mothers who are addressing their calves. It sure seems like they might be getting it from mom." End quote. Yeah, it's very possible, my delicate business goose, that elephants get their name from their mom. So, unlike dolphins and parrots, there's no mimicry, imitation, or modification here. It's very possible a calf is given I can't even say it. It's very possible a calf is given a specific rumble from birth. I'm not crying. I'm not crying. You're crying. Oh God, after the break, we're leaving one of the largest land animals on Earth for one of the smallest aquatic creatures out there. It is tiny, you can barely see it, and it's native to only one small section of the world, but damn, it's making waves. In fact, it might just make a big contribution to neuroscience. For real. So please, stay tuned.
Hello, listeners. This is Anne Bogle, author, blogger, and creator of the podcast, What Should I Read Next? Since 2016, I've been helping readers bring more joy and delight into their reading lives. Every week, I talk all things books and reading with a guest and guide them in discovering their next read. They share 3 books they love, 1 book they don't, and what they've been reading lately. And I recommend 3 titles they may enjoy reading next. Guests have said our conversations are like therapy, troubleshooting issues that have plagued their reading lives for years, and possibly the rest of their lives as well. And of course, recommending books that meet the moment, whether they are looking for deep introspection to spur or encourage a life change, or a frothy page-turner to help them escape the stresses of work, school, everything. You'll learn something about yourself as a reader, and you'll definitely walk away confident to choose your next read with a whole list of new books and authors to try. So join us each Tuesday for What Should I Read Next? Subscribe now wherever you're listening to this podcast and visit our website, whatshouldireadnextpodcast.com, to find out more.
We're the All Creatures Podcast. Each week, Angie and I explore and share amazing details about the many animals we share our world with.
Plus, Chris and I are both PhD scientists and educators. So we do the deep dives in the scientific research and then come back and share what we learn in a fun and casual way. We also speak with other scientists, animal experts, activists, and many other conservation enthusiasts from all over the planet.
So you can find the All Creatures Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, I'm going to ask you to pack some breathable shirts and some sexy rain gear because we're making a brief stop in Bago-Yoma, aka Pagu-Yoma, nestled within central Myanmar. And for my fellow geographically challenged Americans who may be wondering where in the holy hell this is, don't worry, I've got you. Please imagine China. Excellent. Now point to the middle of the country. Great. Now move your finger all the way down past the southern border. There you have it, Myanmar, whose neighbors to the right include Laos and Thailand. And just like Laos and Thailand, Myanmar experiences a climate that creates spectacular lush forests and impressive lively mountain ranges. Bago-Yoma is located right in the middle of Myanmar, about 5,000 feet up, So take your time, and maybe have a seat along the shores of one of its many flowing rivers. The water can be a little murky, and put a pin in that. So, if you want to see who's swimming around in there, just cup your hands and give them a dunk. Now, I don't blame you. You're hesitant to do so. I can see that. Well, I can see why, especially on a show like this. But for real, it'll be totally okay. Who you might catch is a tiny, and I mean tiny fish, named Danionella cerebrum. Now, if you head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post, you'll see a helpful close-up of this whisper of a creature. But if your hands are full with something other than your phone, how dare you? I'll go ahead and describe what few features this little guy has. Danionella cerebrum measures no longer than 1.2 centimeters or a half inch in length, which is small, but it feels even smaller because this fish has no color, no pigments, and is completely transparent, even the eyes. This thing is a swimming skeleton, and in its itty-bitty chest cavity are all of its even itty-bittier organs. This thing was so hard to notice, it wasn't until 2021 when it was given its official name, Danionella cerebrum. And it was given this designation, sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but it was given this designation thanks to the itty-bittiest thing of all, its brain. It has a brain volume of just 0.6 cubic millimeters. And to put that into context, I can't. I really have nothing to compare it to. Danionella's brain is so far the smallest known brain among any adult vertebrate species. Yeah. And this might sound like it could be a problem, right? Well, somehow, it's not. In fact, this tiniest of tiny brains is able to control a mechanism inside the cavity of this fish that's not seen anywhere else. Let's get into it. So join me, will you, at the Senckenberg Natural History Collections in Dresden, Germany, where Dr. Ralph Britz is having the goddamn time of his German life. He's got a collection of Danionella cerebrum swimming around in a clear pool of water, and he's recording not only video, but audio, because these little fuckers are loud. Yeah, we're gonna have a watch and a listen. My friends, I've fired up the old tube of you, the Ube? Anyway, the old tube of you know the one. And please search ultra-fast sound production mechanism in Danionella cerebrum. Okay, there is a 1-minute video that will pop up right there. It's from IFL Science. Please give it a click and watch along. I'm going to play a few seconds of what Dr. Britz recorded. I'm pulling it up right here. Yeah, you don't have to lean in for this one. Oh boy, here we go. Wow, that doesn't sound like a fish at all, does it? To me, that sounds like a huge fucking cricket or maybe even a frog. It is loud, it is fast, and it feels nearly impossible that this noise is coming from something so tiny. Needless to say, Dr. Britz, his mind was blown. When he slowed down the tape, things got even more interesting. Let's have a listen to that. Here we go. Okay, that sounds like a heartbeat. Or like a beat, right? What do you think? Well, if you happen to be watching along on the old tube of you, fast forward to 38 seconds. You're going to see an aerial view of one of these little fish, and at the center of its body is a circle whose left and right sides kind of alternate in movement. They kind of like indent a little bit. This is what got the attention of good old Dr. Britz, who, using a combination of high-speed video, micro-computed tomography, gene expression analysis, and finite difference methods, he did a bunch of clickety-clack calculations with these motherfuckers, and you know what he found? You know what he and his fellow fish nerds found? Drumroll, please. Thank you in the back. Quote, the researchers showed that the males of the Danionella species possess a unique sound-generating apparatus that includes drumming cartilage, a specialized rib, and a fatigue-resistant muscle. End quote. From Senkenbreg.de. Holy shit, my friends. This means that this fish has a drum set inside it. Seriously, head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post. Swipe past all those heartwarming images of African savanna elephants and screenshots of Dr. Briggs' exciting fish video, and you shall see this drum set of sorts and how it works. Now, if you're too busy pounding something yourself, just imagine 3 circles and arrange them like Mickey Mouse's head. For real, go ahead. That big circle in the middle there is the fish bladder, and the 2 other circles are cartilage attached to the bladder by a bone. And I want you to think of it like a drumstick. When the swim bladder contracts, it pulls the cartilage back, creating tension. And the release of this cartilage strikes the swim bladder, producing that crazy loud noise. These contractions alternate, and thus each side produces the noise like a pulse. And you probably have a few questions. I could see your face. You're like, okay, why? And how loud is this thing anyway? And just how fast are those drumsticks hitting that bass drum bladder thing? Great questions. My friends, prepare yourself for a drum solo unlike anything ever seen. Quote, this tiny fish can produce sounds of over 140 decibels at a distance of up to 10 to 12 millimeters or at the length of its own body. This is comparable to the noise a human perceives of an airplane during takeoff at a distance of 100 meters or 328 feet. End quote. Dr. B told Senkenberg.de. So yes, you heard that right. It's the equivalent of us hearing a jet take off. And if you think that's impressive, here's how fast those drumsticks are moving. Quote, this apparatus Sorry, because my mind can't wrap around this number. Check this out. Quote, this apparatus accelerates the drumming cartilage with a force of over 2,000 Gs. End quote from Dr. Britz. What? What? How in the holy hell is this fish metal as fuck? Well, we just talked about how, but let's talk about why it might be so metal as fuck. It's time to unpin that murky pin. It's believed that because this fish is so transparent and lives in cloudy waters, it's possible that they use this sound as a way to communicate. And I have to say, communicating through drum solo is pretty badass. And also badass, Dr. B told Senkenberg.de that this here little fish challenges the conventional notion that the speed of skeletal movement in vertebrates is limited by muscle movement. Quote, understanding the extraordinary adaptation of Danionella cerebrum expands our knowledge of animal locomotion and highlights the remarkable diversity of propulsion mechanisms in different species. This contributes to a broader understanding of evolutionary biology and biomechanics. End quote. So, in sum, this fish may teach us how to make things go a whole lot faster, all while having the tiniest of brains. How does Daniela process all of this sound information in such a little processing space? That is what neuroscientists are trying to find out. Yes, they are getting involved here too, and I am sure all they want to do is build friendly, incredibly fast, tiny robots with AI capabilities. I'm sure that's all they want to do. I'm not worried at all. Thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, telling your friends about this half-inch fish that sounds like a jet. And it won't be weaponized, I'm sure. Never. Not in this day and age. And quickly pivot to how amazing elephants are. How not only do they hear with their feet, but they have names for each other. They have names for each other, y'all. I don't know. I'm tired. It's just too much. I'm overwhelmed. And a deafening thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you love the other podcasts in this family. So please, stay interesting.